The other thing I want to make clear is the fact that when you're purchasing timber, think outside the box. I actually battened the outside of this building using roof battens. So they were 2x1s, 50 by 25 mil, and they're actually treated roof battens. Now they were really cheap. The lengths were about 4.8 metres and they were dirt cheap to buy, but they're perfect for an application like this. So think outside the box. Just because you have a timber labelled or advertised in a particular way, it doesn't mean to say that you can't use it in another application. I used roof battens, they were dirt cheap, perfect for the job, schmicko. So, insulating this building then. Why did I do it? Do you need to do it? So I think the first thing I need to make clear is the fact that unless you're going to be heating a build like this, you do not need to insulate it or line it. It's only if you're going to be heating it or spending a considerable amount of time in it, therefore there's going to be loads of water vapour in the air, that you need to think about insulating it, obviously to keep you warm, and then lining it. And there are a number of ways of doing this. I did it the cheapest possible way. I actually used the insulation attic or loft insulation, basically 100mm thick, cheapest way of doing it. I bought the stuff in a sale. It was absolutely dirt cheap and it does the job wonderfully. This is a really nice cosy little build and it's absolutely wonderful. Now I could have used other methods. I could have bought the polystyrene slabs, just cut them to size. Yeah, that would have been quicker. It would have been more expensive. However, it would have been less time consuming, if that makes sense. So it depends how much time you've got. Excuse me. It depends what your budget is. But just because somebody does it one way, don't mean to say you can't do it another way. If you do what I did and put the loft insulation in, and you live in the northern hemisphere, I live here in the UK, so conditions are typically, you know, they can be cold, they can be very damp and miserable. You need to protect that insulation from water vapour, and the only way you're going to do that is by putting up a thick waterproof sheet. Now I actually used a damp proof membrane, and the reason is I've addressed it numerous times in the comments underneath the section where we dealt with the insulation, because if you don't, what's going to happen is the water vapour in the air is going to seep through, even if you line it, okay, even if you line it with OSB, the water vapour will eventually seep through the OSB, and because it can't escape, it will soak up and saturate the insulation, and you're going to get mould, you're going to get damp mould and all the rest of it. So you need to do it. If you were in a very warm environment, then it just needs to be a breathable membrane, and the waterproof membrane will need to be on the outside, so you need to do the reverse, if that makes sense, okay? But yes, you do need to do it. If you just insulate this and then put OSB up, there will eventually come a point where you're going to get rot. You won't be able to see it, but it will definitely be there. And over a period of time, I'm not saying it's going to happen straight away, it will actually, you're going to have a load of rot between these, the spacing, okay? And if you've put in such a large amount of time and effort, what's the point? Do it properly. Electricity. Now, I had quite a few questions about this. Have I connected electricity here? The answer is no, I haven't. So I did think about this at one of the, at the very early stages. Do I need electricity? How am I going to get an electricity supply to here? And the answer is, I've got a 25 metre extension cable. All I need to do is to run the cable from here to the house, and I have electricity if I need it. If I want it to be here more permanently, all I'm going to do, drill a hole in the corner of one of these walls, run the cable through the hole. I'll need to disconnect the plug obviously, and then I'm going to sort of run it through to the house. But what I'm going to do is, you don't need armoured cable. Yes, that is a belt and braces job, which you can bury in all the rest of it. But all I would do is run the extension lead through a small diameter waste pipe, a plastic waste pipe, the stuff that you can solvent well together to make it pretty waterproof. Run the cable through that so you're protected against the elements. I could stick it in the ground or run it across the top of the fence, and just connect it to the house, so that way I'll have a permanent supply of electricity. If and when I need it, I can do it for about 60 quid. It's no biggie at all. So, you know, you don't need to start fixing lots of units and all the rest of it. It don't need to be ever so complicated. If you have an extension lead with a circuit breaker, you know, an RCD unit, that you can do it really easily. It's simply no biggie at all. I think I've covered the electricity side of things. We've also covered the lining, the build. Incidentally, on the external lining of this structure I used 18mm, internally I used 11mm. You don't need the thick stuff, there's no point in spending that extra money. And also, I think one of the points to make is the fact that you do need to make sure you have some cross ventilation in here, because if you insulate this build and then you line it and you don't have any cross ventilation, you're going to get a build up of moisture, which is going to cause damp and rot on the inside. So you do need cross ventilation, and I covered that one of the videos in the series. Now, making the door. I had a few questions about this, and that can also be incorporated in the questions I had about the window as well. So one of the things I need to stress is the fact that if you do decide to make your own door, you need to make sure you use construction timber. If you use normal timber, it ain't going to be strong enough. If you have a piece of normal timber and alongside it you have a piece of construction timber, you're going to notice certain differences. The construction timber is going to be heavier, and the reason it's going to be heavier is because the timber strands are compacted a lot tighter together, so it's going to be stronger. The other thing is to make sure that you need to make sure it's treated, because you don't want the thing to rot. So if you have a normal piece of timber and a piece of treated construction timber, it's going to be, the construction timber is going to be stronger because it's more dense, it's going to hold fixings better, and it's going to last a hell of a lot longer. Now, why did I need to insulate the door? Well, I decided to insulate it because, quite simply, I'd insulated all of the walls and the ceiling, so what's the point in not insulating the door? If I'm going to go to all the trouble of insulating everywhere else, I need to do the door as well. Okay. I think the other thing to mention whilst we were talking about the door is the fact that it needs to be braced, and you need to brace it, unless you're using really fancy joinery joints, then you need to strengthen it. Basically, you will still need to brace it whether you are or whether you aren't, but I use those 90-degree L brackets to give it that additional strength, because over a period of time you don't want the thing sagging and have to rebuild the bloody thing again. Okay. Now, one of the reasons, sorry, I've got a visitor, just take a quick comfort break. So just a couple more things I'd like to mention about the door and the window, basically, is the fact that, understandably, several people, so there are just a couple of other queries I want to address about the door and the window. Now, quite understandably, I did get several questions about why did you make them? Why didn't you just buy one and fix it into place? And that's a perfectly reasonable query, and I would ask the same thing. And the answer is because this particular build, although I put quite a bit of time and effort into it and thought it through as well as I could for a DIYer, you know, these doors and windows, they're not standard sizes. If I was a bit more experienced and I wanted to build the thing again and I wanted to try and save a little bit of money, I could actually use standard sized doors and windows, okay, but these were not standard, so therefore I couldn't just buy them off the shelf. I think the other thing is that I wanted them to match completely with the look of the build. Now if you go on Google Images and Google, or even go on YouTube and look at videos where people have tried to save money by buying second-hand doors and windows from places like Gumtree and eBay, you might have a timber frame building with a bloody white UPVC window, or you know, a multicoloured door on it. You know, it just don't look right. It looks silly to my mind. I mean, look, if people want to do that and they can get them cheap, that's up to them. It's up, you know, it's a very individual thing. But I wanted everything looking the same. I wanted it to be the best match that it could be. For example, the way the door looks matches with the feather edge boards, matches exactly, you know, the rest of the building, etc. I wanted it to be a window which was timber, and I wanted it once again to match the rest of the build, but it was an odd size. I didn't want to use a normal glass window pane because they're not strong enough. I wanted this to be as secure as possible. I decided to use a polycarbonate sheet for the window, which is resistant to UV rays. It's 200 times stronger than glass, 60 times more stronger than acrylic, but it weren't cheap. The acrylic sheet which I bought cost about £85, something like that, so it weren't cheap. However, I also wanted the experience. I wanted to see whether or not I could build my own window. I could. It works absolutely fine. So you know, if I did this build again and I could find something which was a pretty decent match, then yeah, do you know what, I'd save myself a load of faff trying to make the bloody thing. I'd actually get a pre-made window and just sort of like fit it in. Boom, done. So the worktops and shelves. Now, you haven't seen any videos of me making shelves. You've seen the ones for the worktops. The principle's the same, okay. Now, I decided to use OSB because it's very, very strong. I've actually lined the building externally and internally using OSB. It's also easy to cut down, so it's dirt cheap basically, so that's what I decided to use. I went for the 18mm, absolutely spot on that, okay, but you do need to make sure you've got a sharp blade on your saw. Now you could pimp this up, you could use proper kitchen worktops, but I think for a start they're going to be more expensive. I don't think they're going to be any more durable, and because, you know, they might look a little bit flashy, you might have a marble effect on top and all the rest of it, you're going to restrict yourself and limit yourself as to what you actually do on there. Sorry, my visitors come back with tea and biscuits, bear with me, sorry about this. Cheers. So what else have we got? I think the other thing as well is the fact that if you decide to make your own worktops, say for example using OSB or plywood, you know, you can customise them, can't you, to exactly what you want. And also if you make a mistake, you bugger up the cuts or something like that, then it ain't going to cost you a fortune, is it? So, the final thing I want to address is the cost, because I had more questions about this than virtually anything else. So, I'm a donker by the way. So, before I start talking pound, shilling and pence, there's something which it's very important to mention, and that is, do you try and build it yourself, or do you purchase one in a kit form and then knock it up yourself, or get somebody to do it, or in fact you just buy, you know, do you just hire a joiner to make one, which is going to be the most expensive option. However, hopefully you'll get, you know, the best possible quality. Now the reason I decided to build this myself was because I knew, I was confident that I could build a structure like this, which would be stronger and much cheaper than buying a kit. I could also make sure that it met my exact specifications and that I could customise it. And also I could use the best quality materials I could afford, as opposed to buying a kit which would be more expensive. The quality of the materials wouldn't be as good. You're going to be paying top dollar, as I say, and also they're going to be flimsy. I mean, I know people have bought sheds or log cabins and they're bloody flimsy, you know, and they cost a fortune. And even when you get the kits, you haven't always got the right bits in there, or bits are missing or whatever, or stuff doesn't line up. I would say that if you're a proficient DIYer, then make your own. So that's why I decided to do that. So costs then. Oh yeah, and the other thing is, of course, the fact that clearly if you decide to make your own build, then you've got to make sure you have time. I mean, this took me, I work full time and I just kept coming back to this and doing bits as and when, you know, I had that spare time. But time is a big factor here, okay? But this is absolutely solid. This ain't going anywhere and it will last for many, many years. It needs a paint, but I can do that, you know, whenever. So, how much did it cost me then? I know this is what you guys wanted to know. So, the total build, including absolutely everything, was £2,330. Now, some of you might say, well, that's a lot more than the bullshit you spouted initially when you're saying you're hoping to do it for 1,000 or 1,500 quid, and I wouldn't disagree with that. So this did cost a lot more than I thought it would. I went over budget by many hundreds of pounds. However, I would have been a bit closer to the mark had I not insulated it and not lined it. Okay, so that would have saved some cash. So £2,330. So just a sort of a small breakdown on the main costs here. So the main cost was the OSB. I spent just under £700 on the OSB boards. So the timber for the joists and the framework cost me round about 650 quid, of which £250 was the external cladding. So basically all of the joists, all of the framework for the building cost about 400 quid and £250 for the cladding. That's where the 650 quid come from. So then the next biggest purchase was the roofing felt and the adhesive. That cost me around about 130 quid. And then next biggest costs were the screws and the nails. It actually cost me about £115, but I've actually got quite a bit left over. So I reckon that the actual cost for those, if I was to try and break it down and be a bit more precise, would be about 90 quid. Bearing in mind that I used mainly screws and not nails. It would have been cheaper if I'd have just used the nails, but I chose not to for all the reasons I've previously mentioned and I'm not going to go into again. The next biggest cost was a polycarbonate sheet for the window, £85. The next biggest cost was the actual vapour barrier I used on the outside of the building. That cost 80 quid. The next biggest cost was the insulation, the loft insulation, which I bought at a sale price for £48. Still got a little bit of that left, by the way. And I insulated all of the walls and the roof. Okay, so look guys, you know, this video is probably a little bit longer than I thought it might be, but I've covered as honestly as I can, all of the issues which you guys have raised. I don't think I've missed anything, but clearly if there are some issues which I haven't actually addressed or haven't addressed in enough detail, don't hesitate just to ask me in the comment section below. Anyway, look, I hope you guys are safe, I hope you're well. It will be nice to have a little bit more freedom shortly, but obviously we've got to be patient because we've got to stay safe, haven't we? And also, I must emphasise my appreciation for the fantastic people who work in frontline public services like the NHS staff, police, fire service, ambulance service and all that sort of thing, you know, care support workers who have basically in some cases put their lives on the line. So yeah, it might be a bit frustrating if we can't have the freedoms which we have hitherto enjoyed, if we can't get materials and all the rest of it, but do you know what? If you're watching this video, you woke up this morning, you're breathing and you're alive. Let's be grateful for small mercies, eh? Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.